viewers and listeners. It's Maynard and Albert de la Portillo on the road again for our summer series, Going to Where the Action Is. Today, we're just outside of Denver, Colorado. We're with the Emrgy team, specifically CEO Emily Morris and Chief Technology Officer Tom Cuthbert. We're actually at the site. We spent a good part of the morning not just seeing the site, but also figuring out how we could do this logistically from the site. I think we figured it out. But it's really incredible. Let me just introduce Emily. First of all, she's the CEO and founder. The company was started in 2014. And again, Tom Cuthbert, the Chief Technology Officer. He joined from GE in 2020, where he was also the Chief Technology Officer of the GE Renewable Division. He had a long career at GE. We'll get into a lot of fun stuff today. And with this technology we've improvised here on the site, we think we can show you some of the technology and the actual equipment. It's really fascinating to make big power with water. Mike, before we jump in, tell us what's going on.
Hey, Maynard, I hope you're having a great time there in Denver. We'll just kind of hit on the bond market, broader markets, energy markets, and crude oil today. First off, bond market, as you recall, last Wednesday, the Fed left interest rates unchanged. And on Friday, you had this non-farm payrolls report printed well below expectation and kind of sent bond yields plummeting. And the 10 years now around 4.2%. Now, the bond market is going to be very focused on every economic report over the next few weeks to sort of get a better sense of where the Fed will be primed to cut rates at the mid-September FOMC meeting. So we'll see how that plays out. From a broader equity market standpoint, the S&P 500 is down a little bit. It's kind of meandering so far this week, especially after last week's non-farm payrolls report sent the S&P down a couple percent. There's plenty of S&P companies left to report Q2, but a lot of the big tech companies that have driven the market, those companies have already reported. So, we're going to have to see how the equity market plays out here. And my guess is with those companies already reporting, you're probably going to have a market that's going to kind of meander. And basically, it's going to react more so to economic reports and sort of quarterly earnings reports. From an energy market standpoint, most oil service companies have reported Q2 earnings. And second half guidance in general has been lower. Deflation is accelerating, and that's going to be a benefit to E&Ps. As far as this week, Q2 earnings is going to be really concentrated around E&Ps, midstream companies, and electric utilities. And on the electric utility front, the deal of note this week is there. Today, Brookfield announced an investment of $6 billion for a 19.7% non-controlling equity interest in Duke Energy, Florida. And I would say earlier this year, AEP sold a 20% equity position in their transmission business to KKR and PSP Investments for $2.8 billion. So, and the reason that these regulated electric utilities are selling these minority interests in their electricity, utility, and transmission assets is not only because they're getting really, really good value for these infrastructure investors, but it also allows these electric utilities to accelerate their capital expenditures in a less dilutive way than they possibly would have. Because there's going to be a huge, massive electricity cap spend over the, from here to 2030. So we're going to expect more deals like this are going to be in the offing. As far as crude oil has completely reversed last week's spike. Last week's spike was because of Trump basically moving up his timeline on oil sanction on Russia from 50 days to 10 to 12 days. So far this week, crude oil prices are down about $2. We're trading around $65 right now, due to OPEC Plus's decision over the weekend to put another 550,000 barrels on in the market in September. Now that totals roughly 2.2 million barrels of oil that they think they're going to be putting on since early April, and we'll see how the market reacts to this. Right now, I think what people are worried about is all this OPEC Plus oil is going to create a big surplus potentially in Q4 as much as 1 million barrels per day. And so we'll see how things play out right now. But right now, that's what's really affecting crude oil markets. And so with that, we'll wrap it up and send it back to you.
Okay, Mike, that's great. Robbie Kester has also joined us. Robbie is our partner in technology and innovation. So, Robbie, you've always got a lot of good things on your mind. What would you add before we jump in?
Yeah, thanks, Maynard. Just a couple things, and I'd say that the tech AI space wanted to highlight for everyone. So one of the things you're going to start hearing more about, is kind of exciting in the tech space is a topic known as vibe coding. I didn't know what it was till a little bit ago. And essentially, you'll be able to talk. You can talk to your computer, and utilizing AI, it essentially writes the code for you. So essentially, you're now able to democratize coding. Anyone that can speak English can now program. So Maynard, guys like you and me will be able to start writing computer programs moving forward, which will be really amazing when you think about just coding faster, prototyping, doing solo devs and whatnot. So, as you're just talking to your engineering and technical teams, you'll start hearing a lot more about vibe coding, both the positives as well as some negatives with the technology as it starts out and continues to mature. So
That's really interesting. We vibe coding came up in our Friday morning meeting this past weekend. All the young people instantly knew what it was and were doing it, and all the middle-aged people said, "Huh, is that interesting? Tell me more." So there you go, a little bit of demographics and parity. Well, Emily, this is so fun. Tom, thank you. Mike Savoy is also here. He's an electrical systems engineer with you guys. So thank you to the team for having us.
Thank you so much for making the time to come out.
Well, you have to see it. And here in just a second, maybe we'll go over to the rail. Well, I say the rail because there's a water canal right behind us. We'll let people see what we're talking. Emily and Tom, we got to meet you guys a few years ago, really taken by the technology. I think instinctively energy people like hydro, but we all know we're not building huge dams anymore. We all know that the classic hydro, as great as it is, its days may be a little more behind us than in front of us, but using water to make power is really intriguing. How did you get pulled into this?
Great question. Well, water as a resource for creating, sustaining life through both the water we consume and the water that powers energy is, one of the oldest concepts that we have. And I think many people, as you mentioned, enjoy and can recognize the benefits of water for so many different purposes. And if we, lost all of the hydro today in a blink, there would be cities that can no longer function all across the world. And so, recognizing that water for energy is something that can and should be growing in this time of energy transition, but seeing that it's not is a really challenging, concept. Why isn't water energy growing? And when you look into it, there is so much challenge in operating in natural waterways for permits, for environmental concerns, for recreational concerns. And, ultimately, it is very hard to build new traditional hydro facilities today. That said, there is an immense amount of water that's moving in non-traditional formats. Cities like Denver wouldn't exist if the canal you see behind us wasn't transporting water all the way from the Continental Divide through a series of channels to get to this location here, where we can see the downtown skyline just off in the distance. And being able to bring hydro to other, types of water facilities is really Emrgy's mission. And I will say I came across this not through a PhD study or through a life in water, but actually through technology development, specifically in the defense sector. So the technology you see behind us started with funding from the U.S. Navy under the U.S. Office of Naval Research. And I was working in a previous role on a team that was building out initial prototypes and concepts. And I said, look, this isn't just constrained to a defense application that, might need transportable, reliable 24/7 power, off in another place. We need this here. We need it close to all of our communities. And so I became really inspired by what a technology could do that realize the benefits of water for energy. It takes advantage of that reliable, predictable, controllable power feedstock, but looks and feels more like modern renewable energy, standardization, manufacturability, the integration across large scale arrays and seamless, delivery of power into the grid. And that's what we were building. And I said that this should be everywhere. And so I ultimately acquired the intellectual property for the initial machines. That was many years ago. Some of what we're doing today is exactly the same. Much of what we're doing today is very much refined and optimized and different. And being able to ultimately expand the hydro part of the energy portfolio that we all depend so much on for its low cost, affordable, reliable power is really our mission here at Emrgy.
It's really, as you were talking, Emily, about discovering the technology and then thinking going on to build a company around it. I guess, Tom, maybe I'll jump to you because as we walk around the site, now we have knowledge of Emrgy already, but their component pieces here, we've strung together a system that makes power, and no single piece of it strikes you as like, oh my God, that's the new gadget. It's just the creative piecing together of all these little pieces, using stuff off the shelf to make power. You're the CTO. Maybe talk about the technology.
Sure. And really excited to be here at what is our innovation and test site, one of our earliest installations. It's a great example of all the different types of technology that we're developing and deploying here at Emrgy. But fundamentally, it's taking a technology which is hydrokinetic turbines, which is something that you've seen deployed over the last couple of decades. More traditionally, it's being developed in tidal and marine applications. And what we found was looking at built water infrastructure where water is being conveyed, not unlike a tidal current, but water is moving from a point A to a point B. There's energy embedded in that feedstock that we could take a hydrokinetic turbine deployed in those canals with minimal impact, minimal cost, and almost no construction, extract the energy out of that section of the canal, and then repeat that just a bit further down the canal and continue on in that distributed process of harnessing the energy of that moving water. One of the key things that we're focused on is doing it with a minimal to no impact on the districts that are operating that water. A key fundamental aspect of what we do is partnering with the owners of that infrastructure, the entities that are actually moving that water, whether it be for irrigation or for water utilities, is that they can fundamentally do what they do as a business, which is deliver water, and that we can deploy the system without impacting their ability to do that, but optimizing around the energy that we can harness and actually either sell back to the grid or use to offset the energy cost of that entity. One of the innovative things that we're doing is finding a way to take a turbine technology and build it simply, repeatedly, and scalably. So this is something that whether it's a 5 kilowatt turbine or a 25 kilowatt turbine, it's the same fundamental building blocks and pieces to that. And that we're able to basically build those Lego blocks fit for whichever canal that we're actually deploying in, and then scale it along the length of that canal. A lot of the innovation that we have done has been in the electrical and the way that we actually aggregate that power back and into the grid. And we really took the lead from a lot of what solar has been doing for the last decade and a half, and finding a way to take what we're doing in hydro and bring it into the modern kind of energy transition that's solar's really brought on by using low cost power electronics that are grid interfacing that allow us to integrate a large distributed array of generating equipment back into the grid with pretty minimal effort in terms of like permitting and electrical design. And so what we found is like utilities like PG&E see what we're doing. It looks very familiar. Looks like a distributed solar array and a water canal. In terms of the infrastructure partners we work with who own and actually operate the canals, the equipment doesn't look that different than anything they would normally see in a canal, generators and other equipment. And that's really helped us be able to move this forward fast and move towards deployment quickly.
I was thinking, we all have sort of like the Dutch, water wheel type of knowledge of hydropower, but I think one thing as that lay people we missed, you know, is that there's just so much water being moved around for a whole bunch of reasons, agriculture, industrial, water, supplying water, like, and like you just talk about that vast network of water movement and the fact that it's happening 24/7.
Absolutely. It's something often overlooked, but now once you do see it, I often have folks that send me pictures of canals from their backyard or halfway across the world because water transport is everywhere. Natural rivers and streams have for well over a century, many centuries, been impounded, diverted, moved from one place to another, conserved in places where it might be arid, levied in places where it might be marshy. And many of the industrialized cities we know today would not exist without channelized water in some form or fashion. And so as you think about both rural applications for water that transports out to farmland, to urban applications of creating sustainable ways for water to flow to preserve the habitability of that city as a whole, it is truly everywhere. I'm certain that anyone listening to this podcast is a very short driving distance away from a site that would be applicable for Emrgy's technology. The UN Food and Agriculture Organization has tried to count the miles. It's upwards of 2 million linear miles of canals, open channel conveyance around the world. Pacific Northwest National Lab recently did a count just in the last couple of years of upwards of 150,000 linear miles of canals. And these are infrastructure assets that are in the US even well over 100 years old, created for a different purpose. To move water for one reason or another, not necessarily created for energy, but is a vast real estate that is, number one, aging. Number two, losing economic value every year. It needs maintenance, it needs upkeep. And being able to come into those sites, we don't even anchor anything, we don't impound any water, just simply place rotating turbines in that flow to where you get torque and speed around a shaft as the water naturally flows downhill, and use modern electrical equipment, as Tom mentioned, with the solar inverters to affordably and easily convert that to electric power that is ubiquitously recognized by every utility and accepted by every utility, is something that really is the confluence of ancient physics concepts and truly very modern technology that could not have been done 10 years ago. There's no way that you could actually take the power generated at these generators and transport it just to that power pole right over there where we're connected in to United Power today, without innovations in distributed smart inverters, as well as some really important key regulations that said that FERC has no oversight for power projects within canals of up to 40 megawatts per project. And so we developed high frequency arrays along miles of channels and deliver that power to places that need it the most.
I thought this point is really interesting because when something emerges, you always kind of go, why are we talking about this now? Why does this work now? Like, what's changed? And you were just hitting on it. I mean, we obviously have a demand for a lot of power. But the fact that the world has developed a lot of equipment, be it for solar or other reasons, to take power at a location, do AC to DC, back to AC, whatever you're doing with it. The world has just developed a lot of this kind of equipment, and it's now available, and it's now not just available, but inexpensive.
Exactly. Emrgy is enabled by very recent, last 8-year to 10-year developments in both power electronics, which required decades and billions of dollars in investment prior to that, as well as regulatory optimizations. If Emrgy had to permit these systems the way that you permit a conventional hydro dam, it'd be very, very difficult to be able to be as rapidly scalable and decentralized as it is today.
And just on this, while we're there, Um, there's no fish, there's no wildlife. This is industrial water.
Yeah.
So the environmental things that people tend to associate with water, it's not what we're talking about here.
Exactly. Both from the risks and protection, both of this protection of the system from human or other interaction, as well as protection of humans from the system as it's operating. You know, you can see here behind us, this has a very nice safety fence on it. Not all sites have that, but they're almost always secure locations. They're almost always, you know, have signage and security up for that. And yes, we don't have the type of regulation on recreational, navigational, or other types of environmental concerns in these areas. I do think it's important to note also from the standpoint of project viability and underwriting of a project that installing a power project, really one that relies on the underwriting of the feedstock, putting it in an environment like this allows for very reliable and accurate power modeling and predicting. You know, when you're thinking about conventional hydro or run of river or other very natural based installations where you have to think about droughts or you have to think about a lot of the hydrologic patterns, it's important to note that these are purchased and sold feedstocks that are running from one location to another and operated for a specific purpose. And so often what we're underwriting is, you know, the security of the real estate, the security of the feedstock. We have decades of historical flow through there, through highest, you know, 100-year droughts and highest year flows and, you know, worst 100-year droughts, and are able to statistically model out with very high degrees of accuracy the power that can be generated and ultimately monetized through a system like this.
I was thinking, Tom, you know, historically, for a lot of reasons, just kind of sort of knew what was happening out here. With your devices and your monitoring and your connectivity, you know how much water, what time of day, how fast the turbines are spinning, how much power you're generating. So there's just a massive amount of data about what's happening with this infrastructure.
Yeah. As Emily mentioned, you know, a lot of the infrastructure in particular in the US has been around for well over a century. And the modernization of that's been slow. And so while we're developing these distributed energy projects in the canal, it also opens up the opportunities for modernization of that infrastructure. The data that we're generating off of it, a lot of systems out there today are manually monitored, manually managed. What we're able to bring is the ability to monitor operations of that canal, bring in some automation, really try to bring it into the modern age of infrastructure and how that operates. Also looking at things like water conservation in these projects. So a lot of the canals that are out there right now are earthen ditches that are fairly inefficient when it comes to moving water around, whether it be losing it to evaporative losses or losing it to seepage back in the ground, or just overall inefficiency in the way that water is managed. We're looking at, with these projects, being able to develop, you know, high value energy projects in that canal can also bring in capital to further modernize that infrastructure and improve the project. One of the things is lining of that canal. So an earthen ditch, we can line that with impermeable, you know, non-concrete liner that conserves anywhere from 30 to 50% of the water going through that. What it also does is it reduces the friction in that canal and increases the amount of energy we can get back into the turbines and into the energy project. So it's a win-win, win even, because you're getting more energy, you're getting a better project, you're modernizing that infrastructure, and you're increasing the amount of water that can actually be monetized around that. And that's really the ultimate goal for Emrgy and our projects.
See, I feel like this is another thing that surprises some of us. So we're moving water in ditches, which are literally just ditches. They're not lined, there's not concrete, it's just a ditch. And a lot of the water gets lost into the ground. Of course it does. And just line, get more water.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And Emrgy's revenue model is not dissimilar from an ESCO or another type of performance contract, where while we're already developing and deploying the projects, we can add in that liner and really just monetize it on the performance of every gallon of water saved. it's staggering how much water is actually lost to this erosion or seepage across the country. And being able to monetize that takes Emrgy into a wholly different category of long-term, recurring revenue projects when you can participate really in the power markets as well as in the water markets.
I was thinking of one thing that's interesting about this regulatory standpoint, governance standpoint. So frequently, these canals are Department of Interior is the adjudicating local government official, well, whatever we want to say that. And then the Bureau of Reclamation is the point agency or subgroup. Talk about the Bureau of Reclamation, how you hear it.
Sure. The latest detail I have is that, while the number of miles of canal that the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation directly manages themselves is fairly small relative to the whole picture, about 7,000 miles. However, what you have to understand is that those 7,000 miles are running high water flows 24/7, 365, incredibly firm, incredibly high value baseload energy opportunities, really, all across the country. And if you think about water as the circulation system of the human body, the federal government manage a lot of your main arteries, right? And so we work both with the Bureau of Reclamation as well as with entities that subcontract from the Bureau of Reclamation water off of their facilities through their channels, which provides, again, for a very high level of reliability, predictability across that feedstock. The U.S. Bureau of Reclamation has been doing this for decades, if not even a century. Over the 50s and 60s, they developed the lease of power privilege process where conventional hydropower developers could come in and develop a hydro system on a federally owned canal with a very prescriptive process to get that lease. It's a 40-year lease because hydro projects routinely last at least 40 years, if not much longer. And they'll provide you with a very low cost, nominal lease for you to be able to operate on their channels. And so we have some projects that are going through that lease of power privilege process right now. We have other projects that aren't required for that because perhaps maybe they're further down in the circulatory system of water in this country. But there are very, very clear pathways that already exist for our hydro solution. We are just making it much, much more simple to deploy hydro, expand that through, really product enhancements.
I was thinking, Emily, Mike, and Robbie, I swear I'm going to %. But, the IRA, it's obviously a big boost. Lots of spending, lots of places. The one big beautiful bill, one of the punchy takeaways from that is that nuclear, geothermal, and water all got a boost. They were marked up. Oil and gas was marked up, and solar wind. Talk to us about that. What does it mean if somebody's funding your projects or your company? Is that piece of it?
We are very excited about how the One Big Beautiful Bill positions Emrgy for growth over the next 8 years. As you stated, the investment tax credits for hydropower projects, which Emrgy is exactly that, is retained at 100% of the credit through 2033. That means that for the taxable basis of a project like this, there's a base 30% investment tax credit that gets adders for Buy America, which this system is fully 100% Buy America compliant, as well as other adders for being in energy communities or low-income communities. And in fact, many of our projects also are sited in low-income communities just naturally based on a lot of rural America falling into that census threshold. But being able to have, this is the moment for hydro to shine. It's not going to look anything like the hydro you've seen before, but when you can bring in a right set of infrastructure with highly underwritable water flows with advanced technology that can be rapidly deployed and scaled, with all of the benefits that the administration recognizes about what water power can bring alongside nuclear, alongside geothermal. This is the moment to scale, and we're really grateful that the administration also saw those benefits of hydro in that writing.
Without saying it quite this way, it seems like one reason why nuclear, geothermal, and hydro are the chosen flavors. They're marked up. It's not because they're the cheapest ways to make power. It's because they are fundamentally baseline. And the subsidies the government is providing, thought is, over the next few years, we'll take that baseline power, we'll make it cheaper. With more at scale, we'll figure out what it comes. And that was the theme of last week's geothermal show. What do you see, Tom, for the evolution of costs? Water? Like, how cheap could it get? How much scale could it raise? Like, what's the art of the cost?
Yeah. So, because the technology and the way we deploy this is very modular. So we're not redesigning, redeveloping the technology for every project like you would see in traditional hydro. There's a lot of engineering that goes into every traditional hydropower project. Whereas with what we're doing and the way we've been able to standardize how we deploy this and what we deploy, scale is everything in terms of driving that cost down. So the more projects you can put out, the more volume you can bring in terms of what you're procuring and what you're manufacturing. And we see like a pretty rapid descent in terms of that total cost. Not to mention, these projects tend to be fairly regional. So the more projects that can be put out, they can be put out congruently, and you can really take advantage of the clusters of projects that we have in terms of that deployment and build out. We see today, the projects that we're putting out are anywhere in the $3 to $4 a watt range of deployed projects. Those are sitting somewhere in the 40 to 60% capacity factor. So already approaching, some economics that like solar and or other, just traditional gas generation are seeing at scale as we start to, build out our current pipeline of about 300 megawatts of projects. We see that dropping well down to like the $2 a watt potential for this.
And it'll help our audience. Let's do some fun with, metrics. People are used to hearing right now that to build a new natural gas plant is $2,000 a kilowatt or more.
Yeah.
But give us, if you don't mind, so many people hear that number all the time. Give us some of the corresponding.
Yeah. So, on a project on an energy basis, we're targeting at scale somewhere in the neighborhood of 3 to 6 cents. It's going to depend on, kind of generally the intensity of that site per kilowatt hour of, total life cycle cost of energy for that, levelized cost of energy for that. In terms of the scale deployments on that, 2,000 a kilowatt is definitely deployable for the projects that we're looking to do.
And that's obviously with the ITC.
Yeah, with ITC as it ramps up. But I think as you move towards that 2033 phase out, this is going to be at a scale where that's doable without any kind of incentive for sure.
It's got to get me. We're in the car dealership. We got to ask, plus or minus what's this car cost. Mike and Robbie, let's get you guys in here.
Yeah, maybe I'll go first, Maynard. More, since I'm more of the market strategist guy here, maybe a big picture question. What is the total addressable market that you're going after domestically, and maybe speak a little bit about what that looks like internationally, and really who are your direct competitors at this point?
As I mentioned earlier, the real estate segment here is vast, both in the U.S. and globally.
There's tons of canals.
Tons and tons and tons of miles of canals. The age-old question is, how much is a canal worth? There are definitely canals that are greater than 1 megawatt each in per mile density. There are other canals that are more in the 1/4 megawatt per mile density. So when you think about 150,000 miles in the United States alone, the physical, energy density, power density of this segment is staggering. Maybe it's best to talk about Emrgy's traction toward that because, these canals are aging infrastructure, somewhat hard to even, do those measurements in many ways. Emrgy we've gone out and we have developed relationships where we've secured exclusive development rights on over 10,000 miles of projects or of conduits today. And that represents well over 1 gigawatt of opportunity just at the 30,000 foot level. The next phase in our pipeline building is securing offtake agreements, 30-year plus, sometimes 40-year, perhaps even longer as we continue to grow, site control agreements, followed by revenue contracts, really solidifies the power opportunity and the revenue generation as well. And so we have secured 30-year agreements with 10 different water districts that manage over 3,500 miles of canals as well, representing well over 350 megawatts of development opportunity. And those are districts that have taken the relationship with Emrgy all the way through to a board approval to sign essentially long-term leasehold on their canal for our exclusive use for power generation over many decades. And we see that as the most critical part of the work that we do. Water is not only a long-term asset sort of functionally, but it's a long-term asset culturally. Water districts, the entities that move and convey this water, they don't tend to be very innovative. They don't tend to try new things. And so, developing those relationships where they say, look, one, for example, in central New Mexico, they manage 900 miles of canals. They've said, look, let's do the first project together. We'll sign 30-year agreements on 3 different sites. And with those, after one season, we'll develop as much as we can, because ultimately these are rural areas that need economic development. And what we do is as a part of our power project, we give a portion of the revenue generation to the district as part of that lease agreement. And so in terms of the market, it's overwhelmingly large in terms of gigawatts of potential, as well as, terawatt hours of generation, just based on, you can hear it just flowing behind us. This was flowing for almost 50 years before we started getting electrons out of it a couple of years back. And so, a lot of our water districts feel that anywhere there's untapped opportunity, we should be getting that out. And so with the 350 megawatts in front of us that already have full board support across 3,500 miles of canals, is a construction plan, or we don't even use the C word, we call it installation of an engineered product plan for the next several years. It's going to be really exciting.
Yeah, Emily, just something to mention, and you brought up the topic of like the cost of a gas plant. Cost is one thing. It's also time. Building up a new gas plant, you're 5 years plus to get the equipment that you need for that right now. We're talking about with the pipeline that we have, this is right now. The scale up and the deployment of these projects are ready to happen, coming into this fall and winter into 2026. Hitting hundreds of megawatts of deployed assets is something that we're able to ramp up very quickly. The infrastructure is there, the interconnect is there, the equipment, from a manufacturing standpoint, scales really well. So speed to deployment and to take advantage of this is also a big part of what we're focused on.
That was my second question. If you were to talk about discussion 6, 9, 12 months ago, it was sort of cost, what the market looks like, but now it seems like speed to market is a big deal. And maybe you can talk about that. Is that how the discussions are changing with the customers you're talking to?
Yeah, speed is, I guess, probably one of the primary focuses of what Emrgy does. What kills a lot of traditional hydropower projects is time, regulatory time, design and construction time. it's 5 to 10 years to even get to like an NTP on a traditional hydropower project. When I joined the Emrgy team, about 5 years ago, one of the things, Emily made clear to me is that, we're not trying to be like everything else. I want this to be something that's as ubiquitous and deployable as, solar has become, that you can go and drop solar on anything, anywhere, and interconnect it pretty simply. But we want to do it to where this can be a baseload asset that's adding that high value energy 24/7. And so our ability to take this to market quickly and actually scale that up is going to be a big competitive advantage for Emrgy. Definitely looking at, talking about the big, beautiful bill and how the ITCs are rolled into that. There is a timeline for that. That's not forever. And we want to be taking full advantage of that now. And the investors investing in Emrgy, investing in our projects can take full advantage of that now, then to hit a scale where the costs and the values of those projects are even greater, even outside of that ITC.
So you think about showing the world your solution and the types of projects you've got a bunch of them working on. Are you most excited to show someone the speed with which you can get the power? Or are you most excited to show them scale at which you can get the power? Or are you most excited to demonstrate the reliability of the power so you prove, the stat line of trying to get solar costs, but with reliable,
Yeah.
uninterruptible power?
Well, since I'm here with Emily, I'll have to say it's all three equally across the board.
I was trying to get you to choose.
It's those three kind of legs of the triangle are the things that we're constantly trying to optimize around.
But can I ask?
Maybe I'll jump in. For me, when we have engineers come out to this site, and hopefully we'll get some footage of it for today, most engineers immediately understand the speed. They say, wait, so there's no anchoring to this canal. You didn't change anything. You just took this, 8-foot culvert, concrete culvert, picked it up off the truck, dropped it in. Speed is like the deployment speed is everything. I think the challenge that we've seen or heard from investors around speed is how quickly can you get these water districts to really sign up with you? And for us to say, look, we have 900 miles in New Mexico already signed on 30-year agreements. We'd rather get the first megawatt in today, the next 20 megawatts in next year, and then just go, massive deployment than to sit and design a very massive system that can come in year 3. That's not Emrgy's model.
You also used the word stall, not build.
Yep.
Stall, it's just a whole different animal when it comes to speed.
Yeah, this has been great. Thank you, Emily. Question for me, as we're thinking about, speed, looks like y'all, have a solution quick to market. What's coming to my mind is, data centers, which are obviously expected to drive a lot of electrical energy. And with y'all's solution, you have both a power solution and a water solution, right? With the canals and whatnot. Are you guys getting any hearing from hyperscalers or getting inbounds from data centers, or is the solution just not at that power scale? What are you guys hearing?
I can tell you a real example of meeting with a hyperscaler, actually at a public event, who procures energy and water, or touches both in the organization. And they said, look, we need so much power today that we are making massive contracts. And, with the scale up that, we'd have to take the risk on getting that there, there is a size limit to what we can sign on power contracts. That said, we are using more water than ever, and we have water positive goals. And so if you can provide us a power and water solution, we don't care what size it is, we need it right now, because our water positive goals are very much at risk. There is massive consumption for cooling, and that has real community effects for that. And so being able to put in service a system that generates renewable around the clock energy direct to that hyperscaler as well as an opportunity for that hyperscaler to participate in that water conservation that contributes to their water positive goals, is something that we are seeing highly resonate across that. And it doesn't have to be all or nothing. A lot of our installations have really attractive power contracts, and the project stands on its own 2 feet on the power side. When you layer in the water conservation and the pay per gallon of savings underneath, whether you're a hyperscaler, whether you're a large ag, whether you're bottled water company, whether you're a brewer, it is an absolute home run to be able to participate in these. It's just the right thing to do for where you are in your stewardship.
Sort of what you're touching on, we talked about this before, is I'm a hyperscaler and I show up anywhere in America where I'm building something. Got all these issues to sort out that everybody knows, but one that's under discussed is I am not going to negatively impact water situation. That would be a big one.
Mm-hmm. And there's some clear criteria that goes into siting data centers that tries to contain that. So if you look at an overlay of maps from locations of data centers, current and planned, and a map of water infrastructure, it is uncanny. They're on top of each other, because getting a permit to pull water off of a natural river to cool your data center is a whole different cost, timeline, and community engagement process than drawing water out of a canal to do that. And so we already have a lot of natural co-location, but then to be able to say, look, you can actually, as opposed to taking that water away from farmers or from other locations, you can invest in the project, bring that back in, will conserve the water that you're consuming along the way, is a really powerful value proposition.
So this noise that's coming out of Washington, let's build data centers on federal land. They'll probably think that next to Canal, absolutely, that the reclamation is in charge of, and then they can put in water power.
It would make no sense not to, because if you're on federal land next to a federally protected river, that's going to be even harder to get those types of permits. And so co-location with water infra is already a very natural.
Tom, can I ask you one? And then we've got to walk to the rail and show these guys this is a big teaser. Absolutely. Robbie leads our technology. Had this long career in Chile. You've seen big companies try to innovate. They got amazing people. They got big balance sheets. They're incredible. Yet, small companies continue to be epicenter. So you worked at GE and now you worked at Emrgy.
Yeah.
You saw technologies there. You see what you're doing. How do you think about small companies' ability to figure all this out, pursue it, like a sleep team? And it's just a really see both ends of the
Yeah. While I was at GE, I worked in a lot of different industries, and most of the things that I worked on were typically something on the innovative side, trying to enter in a new market, a new technology, trying to kind of push outside of the box that was happening at GE. And in my time there, that was something that we did a lot of, and then it started to taper off, and then I now GE's kind of in a bit of a renaissance, if you will, of getting back to some of those roots of innovation. What was always hard, what's always challenging to do there is, there's a bottom line, there's things that you have to kind of maintain as a company. There's the global strategy of that business that, tends to force you towards, they have to be these kind of massive grand slams. Like, it's what pushes a GE to be in hydro, but to focus on big hydro, those are companies that can solve those very, very big problems, in gas and aviation and healthcare. But, a lot of the solutions, and we talked about this when I was there, is about kind of, they called it as disrupting and decentralizing, and like, trying to realize that it isn't always just bigger is better, but finding kind of those areas where there's a problem that you can get in and solve. And that's tough to do in a big company, but that's something that small companies and startups, in particular Emrgy, can be really, really good at, because you can get very focused on solving that problem. You can really focus all your energy, all your resources at trying to really do that in the best way possible, really 10x the solution to that problem. And that's been a lot of what I've been having fun here with Emily and the team and is building, is like having that focus. There's a lot of things we could do at Emrgy. We could be more of a traditional hydropower company. We could get into marine and tidal energy. We talk about these things often and try to figure out, should we do these things and will that kind of create more scale? But we talk a lot about like, no, we're here to solve this problem. We're going to focus on that. We're going to make sure that we're the best company in the world that can do this. And that's what's going to bring the value. And I think that's the difference. That's, a small company like Emrgy, that's a startup, that's able to innovate, that's able to fail and try again, and it actually really kind of push the envelope, creates a lot of freedom. That's really been fun and exciting, that I think it's hard to do at some of the bigger companies. That's kind of where I see at least some of that, the difference.
And if I could maybe just add one thing, actually someone that we know famously at GE said, GE is very good at elephant hunting. It's what we do. We hunt elephants. We hit a big one once every 3 or 5 years, and we can starve in the meantime. And so when they talked about that in the context, it was really around sort of the future of energy, and is the future of energy more elephants that are being hunted, or is it maintaining a consistent development and scale up opportunity that's linear? And that's really what we're doing here at Emrgy. And my personal philosophy is that in a world where we haven't yet seen what can happen with energy security or energy resiliency at the community level. I mean, we saw the 10-hour blackout in Spain or whatever it was earlier this year. But being able to put in highly nimble, highly reliable baseload facilities at the community level and just scale those to become, in terms of the overall energy mix, something really meaningful, is much more the philosophical approach at Emrgy than to be elephant hunters, if you will.
Well, okay, we've teased the crowd. Let's walk over.
Yeah.
And we got to show these guys what we've got here.
Sure. Maybe as we're walking over, I'll mention, so this is a partnership we've had for a long time, since the early days of Emrgy, with Denver Water. And where we're at here is we're just outside of the Ralston Reservoir on the South Boulder Canal. And this is feeding into that reservoir. Denver Water was one of the first and earliest partners with Emrgy. And so what we've set up here has become really a key part of our innovation and development. So we use this as an innovation site. We're able to kind of test new technology, new controls, new turbine geometries and materials, all while generating power back to the grid that Denver Water is able to see the benefit of. And so that's kind of been the joint relationship we've had here. That's been really fantastic.
Well, I'm kind of speaking to the crowd. You guys know all this gazillion times better than me. But Albert just gave us a shot of the turbines, and I think this is the very relatable piece of this, right? This is the thing that just insert into the water. It's not quickly be pulled out. And the water creates power when it hits those turbines and turns these electric motors. But maybe Tom and Emily, we could ask you to explain kind of this next piece of equipment, because we're going to get all the way over there where it goes to the grid.
Yeah.
But take it away.
Yeah, so a couple things that we have going on here is we have the hydro. Something I haven't mentioned yet is we actually also have floating solar in the canal here too. One of the things that we've been developing is a hybrid system. So as we deploy these distributed on a canal, we're having to run a distribution network along that canal, a medium to low voltage network. And so taking the space between these turbines to also be able to put floating solar in just increases the overall energy density of that project and the total value of that. All of this is collected on a DC bus through a set of variable frequency drives that are inside this box here. So we're basically taking the AC off the generators, converting it to a stable DC, which is much like what you would see in a typical solar farm. And then that's fed into what is a standard off-the-shelf solar grid interfacing inverter. So in terms of the way you interface with the utility, which is actually tying in just a couple hundred yards down the way there, it's exactly what they would see for any kind of standard inverter-based renewable energy.
Maybe we could walk around to the other side because
Sure.
it gets back to what you were talking about. Like all this innovation and scale that was happening in power broadly was making this equipment cheaper, more reliable, better. And this is what you call a solar inverter.
Exactly. Many people may recognize the solar inverter if they have solar on their house or on their place of work. What's really important to Emrgy is that box remains fully compliant with all grid requirements, because that's what allows us to install and get interconnection agreements very quickly across numerous states and countries. In fact, for our project that is commercially operating today in New Zealand, we shipped the Emrgy controls and the Emrgy software. They purchased the solar inverter locally and put it on the side. And that allowed them to get the interconnection with the utility very seamlessly, without questions. And it really, from an electrical architecture perspective, it feels like solar when you're looking at the electrical diagrams, but the generation is relative to the water flow, which is 24/7.
Yeah, Maynard, I forgot, you asked me what is this doing, and we kind of buried the lead. It's actually powering the podcast, too, which is something we needed to have.
That is the most fun thing about this is we are running on hydropower right now. So thanks so much for mentioning that. Maybe excuse the analogy, but from the line to the inverter. From here, people are familiar with solar projects. It's a little bit like this would look exactly the same, but you just replace the engine.
Yeah.
So the engine, instead of being wind or solar or something like that, it's that water turbine that's turning 24/7.
Yep, it's generating when the sun goes down, and continuing to produce that power and doing it in a way that complies with all the inverter-based grid kind of codes and requirements. And a lot of the reason why we did it that way is you could come up with a very novel way to solve that problem off of a hydro generator, but it's going to create a lot of complexity and cost, and it require a lot more development and innovation, and maybe for a little bit of efficiency. But ultimately, what we focused on was like, let's take advantage of what's already there and just optimize around that, which is something that's really been kind of the innovation that Emrgy's brought here, is that we can deploy at scale large distributed energy projects that tie into the grid, unlike any other project that you would see out there.
I was wondering, probably getting a little short on time. This has been so fun. Again, full salute to Mike Savoy, who, is the superintendent of this amazing site. You're more than that, Mike, and Albert, you figured out all this video. But Tom, we were talking earlier, came up in Emily's comments, just the way the world rethinking water in a lot of ways. Its value, how to use it, conservation, where we're going to need it. And, Robbie from our team has been spending a lot of time on the produced water issues in the Permian. That's another situation. That's a different kind of water issue. But would you mind just sharing a couple of thoughts on the water world and how it's not what it used to be?
Right. So, I mean, the value of water kind of as it's seen in the market, where we're working with districts, Emily mentioned that, they've been delivering water for 100 years. And the value of that's pretty well defined. It's tied to the agriculture that they're delivering it for. You're starting to see with the build out of things like hyperscale data centers and more industrialization around these rural communities, which is kind of benefiting those communities, but it's also putting more demand on that water. And that's starting to create other values for it. So whether it's feeding the cooling for a data center, or it's feeding an industrial plant that's producing bottled water, the value of that water is going up. While at the same time, the supply of that water is also being challenged. And so what Emrgy is trying to be is in the middle of that, where we're delivering solutions that can optimize that, improve, conserve more water. Those are available today. What we're focused on is creating those projects that can really stand on their own, using the energy technologies that we have, along with water conservation and modernization projects to make it really valuable and something that can come into the private sector that's really going to want to invest in things like that. I know, Emma, you can add a lot more to that too.
Yeah, I think looking at the water and the power as one integrated system has many benefits, not just for all the things we talked about today, but ultimately, the opportunity to generate hundreds of megawatts, if not more than that, of clean, renewable baseload power. Actually, our projections are in terms of billions of gallons per year and saving billions of gallons per year in really stressed watersheds through integrating those efforts and high efficiency through our systems. And then bundling it all together where at the end of the day, you get 300% more power output just by having the water run through the turbines in a better channelized way. It all works together and it ultimately puts Emrgy in a whole new class of long-term infra asset developers and operators.
I was thinking our friend Chris Wright used to always scold us when we would say something is clean and it's not clean. It's like, hey, everything just has trade-offs. So, which is a fair comment. But when you're around this, you feel like if this isn't clean, I don't know what is.
Well, a lot of our water districts, they see a lot of parallels between energy storage because this is something that they see running and available all the time. They're just not tapping into it when they need to. And so, I think that, whether you consider hydro clean or unclean or anything else, as we believe that diversity is the most important thing that we can achieve and resiliency is the most important thing we can achieve as we start to really understand what is going to serve this next generation of data centers and grid demand. And a solution like this can scale very rapidly as well as in places that are very close to where it's being utilized.
You said earlier, use of the word distributed. Sometimes people, it's kind of this word that doesn't really capture the sex appeal or the uniqueness of some of these systems. But there.
Yeah, at Emrgy, I believe that the power of communities is going to grow as we continue to evolve as humanity, and that a lot of what we've seen in other industries, think of very large, the telecom going up to everybody on landlines, everyone's fixed to now it's all distributed, decentralized. You have the satellites and everyone has their own device in their hand. I think that it's important for energy decision makers and policymakers to consider the resiliency and security of having energy generated without long distance transmission right in the heart of where those energy consuming activities are happening and making that overall system much more resilient and long-term sustainable for the community. That's one reason we have to spend as much time with water districts as we do is they don't look at 5-year assets. They don't look at 10-year assets. They are looking at what is the water district going to look like when my grandchild runs this water district, and to invest in something that is as age old as hydro, as well understood as the mechanical systems they have on site, and that can take advantage of their already existing operations in their community, not imported from far away, is something that really resonates with these groups and something that I think we've been really successful at communicating with them.
Well, I can think of more questions. You guys, you've been so generous with your time. This has been fascinating. You knew it would be. I also will say, Veriton, our small fund, you guys have been great partners. We're intrigued and excited. Appreciate your friendship and also just love what you're doing.
Well, we are so grateful that you have aligned with our vision and that you support what we're doing out here and in many other states and countries around the world, and are excited about the next steps of growth here at Emrgy and just with water and energy all across the globe.
Well, there you have it. This is definitely our most on location. It's just getting better and better. So thanks for your patience. Thanks for listening, everybody. And we'll talk to you soon.
Thank you.